Hey guys, tonight we slip into a gas-lit haze where every tick of a grandfather clock feels like a heartbeat and every polished fork gleams like a weapon. You're standing in front of a tall Victorian townhouse, fog curling around the lampposts, your invitation trembling slightly in your gloved hand. Somewhere inside, a butler waits with the judgmental gaze of a hawk in human form, ready to assess your worth by how you handle your outerwear. This isn't just dinner. It's social warfare with roast beef on the side. And honestly, you probably won't survive this without committing at least 3 minor faux pas. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like joining the fun, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who's drifting off together across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach the heavy oak door, brass knocker shaped like a lion's head, glaring at you as if to say, "You're late." It's 7:45 p.m., which is dangerously close to both fashionably late and social suicide. The Victorians are serious about timing. Too early, and you'll interrupt the host's last-minute panic about floral arrangements. Too late, and you're the villain who delayed the soup. Historians still argue whether arriving 10 minutes late was acceptable or a scandalous insult. But the safest bet is to hover outside until the clock chimes the exact hour. Inside, the air smells of beeswax polish, starch, and mild anxiety. You hand your hat to a footman who looks about 17 and already disappointed in you. He doesn't speak. Servants in well-bred houses aren't supposed to. They communicate through gestures as subtle as semaphore, a tilt of the head meaning this way, a raised eyebrow meaning don't drip rainwater on the Persian rug. You step into the hall and instantly realize the first test has begun. Your gloves, yes, you have gloves, must stay on until after the handshake, but only if the hostess is also gloved. If she isn't, you must slip yours off faster than a magician palming a coin. One false move, and you'll be labeled that person from the provinces. As you wait for your turn in the receiving line, you hear a murmured symphony of greetings. "Delighted, my dear," and "so charming to see you again." You nod, trying to mimic confidence, though the last time you attended something this formal was probably a high school prom. The hostess glides toward you in silk so crisp it could cut glass. Her smile is rehearsed perfection. "How good of you to come," she says, which is Victorian for, "Please don't embarrass me." You bow slightly, or curtsy, depending on your presentation, and murmur the approved reply. "The pleasure is entirely mine." You have no idea what that means, but it sounds safe. Somewhere in the background, a pianist is murdering Chopin. The invitation, folded neatly in your pocket, promised an intimate supper. In Victorian code, that means 20 guests, 3 courses, which actually means 8, and enough silverware to outfit a small army. The dining room beyond the archway glows like a miniature sun, every candle flame trembling in the crystal chandeliers. Here's your first mainstream historical fact. By the mid-1800s, the upper middle class used dinner parties as social auditions. It wasn't just about eating, it was about proving you belonged. Every bite was a declaration that you understood the unspoken rules of a world obsessed with manners. And here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. Some hosts reportedly used secret hand signals to warn guests about conversation topics. A discreet tap on a wine glass might mean change the subject, while a cough could mean the colonel's mistress is present. Avoid mentioning Paris. These rules weren't written down because knowing them was proof of breeding. You follow the butler's lead toward the drawing room, where other guests mingle under a haze of perfume and cigar smoke. A gentleman nearby is discussing the weather with the seriousness of a military campaign, while a lady in lilac is whispering about someone's scandalous use of dessert spoons last week. You realize with creeping horror that you'll need to talk soon, and probably not about anything you actually care about. The grandfather clock chimes 8. The host raises an eyebrow, a silent command. Couples form up like nervous schoolchildren. There's an exact order to entering the dining room: rank, gender, and familiarity, all braided into one bewildering hierarchy. You, the newcomer, will go last, trailing behind a lady whose perfume could stun a horse. As you enter, your senses are assaulted by symmetry. The table is a battlefield of perfection. Silver gleams, napkins folded like miniature swans, and floral arrangements that look suspiciously like taxidermy. Place cards line the table, handwritten in perfect copperplate. You find yours, mercifully near the end, far from the host's sharp eye. You're seated between a colonel who won't stop adjusting his cuffs and a woman whose feathers threaten to knock over the salt cellar. Both glance at you, assessing whether you're worth conversation. You smile politely, which in Victorian terms is like waving a small white flag. The first course is still a mystery, but the air carries a scent of consomme and pressure. You rest your hands in your lap, flat, calm, obedient. The dinner hasn't even begun, yet already your muscles ache from tension. And beneath all this, you sense something fascinating. Dinner, here, isn't about nourishment, it's about choreography. You're part of a living play where every gesture is scripted and every utensil has a backstory. Historians still argue whether these rituals arose from genuine refinement or sheer class anxiety. Maybe both. A footman glides by, placing a card menu beside your plate. The lettering shimmers under the candlelight. 8 courses, written in French, because English was apparently too middle class. You try to read it, but potage à la reine and sole à la normande blur together like a foreign spell. The colonel snorts approvingly. A fine spread, he mutters. You nod, pretending you agree, though you have no idea whether à la reine means with cream or with regret. Someone coughs. Someone laughs too loudly. The pianist in the next room begins again, as if to remind everyone that conversation must not lapse into silence. The host clinks his glass, a signal that the dinner may proceed. Your fork gleams in front of you, innocent and menacing. You realize that every utensil, every glance, and every bite tonight will tell your story of manners learned too quickly, of social codes memorized in panic, of your desperate wish to blend in among the clinking crystal and whispering lace. And just as you exhale, thinking you've made it through the entrance unscathed, the colonel leans toward you and whispers, "Careful with the oysters. The last guest who swallowed one wrong hasn't been invited back." The sound of cutlery being adjusted around you is almost orchestral. Metal brushing linen, glass humming under fingertips, the faint chime of porcelain. You're not even seated properly yet, but already the evening has turned into a test you didn't study for. You glance around, pretending to admire the floral arrangements, but really you're trying to copy everyone else's moves. The hallway you just passed through feels miles away now, a liminal space between the safety of ignorance and the minefield of etiquette. The ritual of arrival, that deceptively short prelude, is where reputations rise and fall before the soup even cools. You remember stepping through that door and feeling the temperature shift, not of air, but of expectation. Victorian dinner etiquette begins the moment the carriage wheels stop. If you arrive too early, you're an overeager amateur who might catch the hostess still shouting at servants. If you arrive too late, you insult the entire lineage of your host. Historians still argue whether fashionably late originated as rebellion or necessity. Some say it was a mark of confidence. You were important enough to make others wait. Others claim it was pure self-preservation. Better to risk snubbing the cook than endure the host's frantic pre-dinner chaos. The butler at the door remains the gatekeeper of judgment. His white gloves and impassive face suggest a silent power. In grand houses, he announces each guest in booming tones, like a master of ceremonies at a royal court. Mr. Edward Linton of Kensington, Miss Beatrice Marlowe of Bath. And then, your name, slightly mispronounced, hanging in the air like a fragile ornament. You step forward, smile fixed, hoping no one notices your sudden inability to breathe. Inside, the hostess greets you with a delicate curtsy, her gown rustling like wind through dry leaves. Her husband stands nearby, looking as though he hasn't smiled since the invention of the steam engine. You perform the handshake, or more precisely, the hand presentation. In polite society, a man never grips, he offers. The lady lets her fingers rest briefly on his, just enough to acknowledge humanity without implying friendship. A mainstream historical fact to ground you. This rigid choreography wasn't just about manners, it was about status signaling. The Industrial Revolution had created a new class of wealthy individuals desperate to mimic the aristocracy. They had money but lacked lineage, so they compensated with precision etiquette. Every glove, bow, and phrase became a passport into legitimacy. The hallway behind the door is more crowded than a theater lobby at intermission. Footmen take coats in one synchronized motion, each folding fabric so neatly it might be framed. You notice something strange. The hierarchy among servants is just as strict as that among guests. A butler outranks a footman, who outranks a hall boy, who might as well be invisible. There's an entire social ladder inside the one you're already climbing, and somehow even they manage to judge you. A fringe tidbit that rarely makes it into textbooks. Some hosts deliberately kept their houses cold so that guests wouldn't linger too long in the hall, chatting before the dinner bell. Chilled fingertips, frozen smiles. It was social efficiency disguised as refinement. You stand aside, waiting for the flow of introductions to thin. A lady in a plum-colored gown breezes past, trailing the scent of violets and disdain. "You're new," she says, not as a question, but as a diagnosis. You stammer out something about being delighted to attend, and she gives a smile sharp enough to slice butter. "Do enjoy yourself," she adds, which might be encouragement or a threat. A bell rings somewhere deep in the house. The murmur of voices hushes. You sense the next phase approaching, seating. But before that, there's a perilous transition, the drawing room mingle. This is where the real arrival ritual unfolds. Everyone is standing, drink in hand, performing the conversational equivalent of synchronized swimming. The men exchange cautious pleasantries about politics, the weather, or railway expansion. The women compliment fabrics and suppress yawns. You try to blend in, holding your glass of sherry like it's a security blanket. Conversation here is treacherous. The Victorians loved rules about what not to say. Never mention religion, money, or, ironically, food. The only safe topics are the season, someone's health, how delightful to see you recovered from that dreadful cold, and possibly opera, provided you don't admit to enjoying it too much. Someone beside you laughs in the wrong tone. Heads turn, brows tighten. You realize even laughter is regulated. Too loud and you're vulgar. Too quiet and you're dull. The social balance here is as fragile as the bone china teacups in the next room. A gentleman in a velvet waistcoat sidles up, introducing himself as Mr. Fenton, an acquaintance of the host. Translation: he's here because someone dropped out. He proceeds to lecture you on the superiority of English dining customs to the French, which is ironic given that half the menu will be in French. You nod rhythmically, letting his words wash over you like background music. Historians still debate whether Victorians actually believed in these rigid manners or were simply trapped by them. Diaries from the era reveal both awe and resentment. One woman wrote that attending a dinner party felt like walking through a garden of glass, beautiful but perilous with every step. You finally spot the host near the fireplace, giving subtle nods that trigger a chain reaction among guests. The signal is clear. Dinner is about to be announced. The butler reappears, voice sonorous and slow. Dinner is served. And just like that, the entire room shifts into motion, a flock of humans trained to glide rather than walk. You join the current, trailing behind the more important guests, pretending you understand the order of precedence. The trick, apparently, is to act as though you belong, even when every instinct screams otherwise. Another curious detail: the Victorians believed that entering the dining room in the correct order ensured harmony for the entire evening. A misstep, like seating an unmarried man beside a married woman without her husband's approval, could doom the meal to awkward silence. It's like cosmic dining karma, and you're praying not to disrupt it. The procession moves into the dining room, candlelight flickering across polished mahogany. You take in the long table, the gleaming cutlery, and the host's faint smile as he watches everyone take their places. This, you realize, is the true beginning. Not when you sat, but when you arrived correctly. You've survived the gauntlet of introductions, endured the small talk, and somehow managed not to spill your drink. It's a small victory in a war of manners. The colonel from earlier catches your eye and gives a knowing nod, as if to say, "You made it past the first round." You nod back, silently celebrating your survival, until you notice the forest of forks awaiting you. Dinner hasn't even started, and you're already exhausted. You exhale, straighten your spine, and tell yourself the same lie every Victorian guest must have whispered. It'll get easier from here. You hover beside your chair like a performer waiting for the curtain to rise, terrified that one wrong move will ruin the entire show. The dining room glows with golden candlelight, each flame mirrored 100 times in the polished silver and glass. The air smells faintly of roast beef and starch, the aroma of formality itself. Every guest stands stiffly behind their assigned seat, hands lightly on the back of the chair, waiting for the cue to sit. You notice how no one dares sit before the hostess does. It's a small act of submission wrapped in civility. When she finally lowers herself, it's as though the world exhales. Chairs slide inward in perfect harmony, servants synchronizing like clockwork. You mimic the motion, careful not to scrape the floor. Congratulations. You've officially sat down without scandal. But the battle isn't over. The Victorian dinner table is less about eating and more about navigation, social and physical. Around you gleams what looks like a silver armory, multiple forks, knives, and spoons of slightly varying shapes and sizes, each with a destiny you'll almost certainly misinterpret. Forks, in particular, seem to multiply like rabbits. Fish fork, entree fork, dinner fork, salad fork, dessert fork, oyster fork. Historians still argue whether this proliferation was born of genuine necessity or competitive overdesign by manufacturers desperate to sell more silverware. The rule, supposedly, is simple. Start from the outside and work your way in. But simple, in Victorian terms, means you'll still get it wrong. You watch your neighbors for cues, the colonel to your right, the feathered lady to your left. The colonel fingers his napkin like it's a grenade pin. The lady already has hers unfolded with balletic grace. You follow her lead, placing yours in your lap. A mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, seating arrangements had become strategic instruments of social engineering. The host and hostess planned every pairing like a general mapping out battlefield positions. No one sat beside their spouse. It was considered too familiar. Instead, hosts positioned witty guests beside dull ones, titled beside untitled, rich beside richer. The goal was balance, or at least the illusion of it. The butler begins his slow procession around the table, refilling glasses of sherry for the opening toast. You grip your stem delicately, thumb and forefinger poised halfway up, because apparently even glass holding has rules. The host rises, gives a short nod, and murmurs something about friendship and the blessings of good company. Everyone smiles, sips, and replaces their glass with choreographed precision. "Beautiful service, isn't it?" says the colonel beside you, breaking the silence. His mustache twitches approvingly. You can always tell the quality of a household by how silently the servants move. You hum agreement, though you've barely noticed the servants until now. They're ghosts in black and white, gliding between chairs without sound, performing a ballet of invisible labor. You lean slightly forward, pretending interest in the table decorations. A centerpiece of hothouse roses, arranged to look casual but costing more than your monthly rent. The flowers catch candlelight, scenting the air with faint sweetness that mixes with roasted meats and polish. It's beautiful, yes, but it also feels suffocating, as though the table itself is judging your breathing pattern. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Victorians sometimes used placement maps beneath the tablecloth so servants could see, through the light fabric, exactly where each dish and utensil should go. It was like dinner party GPS, guiding them to perfection. Heaven forbid the dessert spoon ended up 2 inches off center. Civilization might collapse. You glance toward the far end of the table, where the host is deep in conversation with a viscount who looks like he hasn't laughed since childhood. Every guest down the line seems trapped in their own miniature theater. Voices rise and fall in polite waves. Laughter's soft, almost pre-approved. Someone sneezes delicately into a lace handkerchief, then apologizes as if confessing to a crime. Historians still argue whether Victorian dinner etiquette was meant to foster comfort or control. Some believe it kept conversation flowing within safe, predictable boundaries. Others think it was designed to remind everyone of their place, literally and metaphorically. Either way, you feel the invisible cage forming around you. "Are you from London?" the feathered lady asks, tilting her head like a curious bird. You nod, though your accent probably betrays otherwise. "Ah, charming," she says, "such dreadful fogs, but nothing improves the complexion like a little coal dust, I suppose." You can't tell if she's joking. Her smile says yes. Her tone says maybe not. You respond with your safest weapon, polite laughter, the kind that suggests you're in on the joke without actually participating. It works. She turns away, satisfied. You take a discreet breath, wiping condensation from your glass with the corner of your napkin. Meanwhile, the first course is being served. Footmen move like synchronized swimmers, placing soup bowls before each guest in one seamless motion. The aroma of chicken and nutmeg drifts upward, potage à la reine perhaps. You remind yourself not to lift the bowl to your lips, barbaric, or blow on the soup, uncivilized. Instead, you tip the bowl slightly, spooning away from yourself. It's less efficient, but more elegant, an entire metaphor for the Victorian mindset. The colonel clears his throat, clearly itching for conversation. "Tell me, do you hunt? You nearly choke on your spoonful." No, not recently." He nods gravely. "A pity. Teaches discipline." His eyes flick toward the table. So does this. Around you, conversation blooms and dies like small fires. A young man 2 seats down boasts about his travels in India. Another lady murmurs approval, but then fans herself nervously, as if the mere mention of the colonies is improper. Somewhere further along, laughter bursts, too loud, then quickly fades, a breach contained. You find yourself mesmerized by the rhythm of it all. Eat, sip, smile, listen, nod. The repetition becomes almost hypnotic. Perhaps that's why these dinners could last for hours. It wasn't just eating, it was performance art, sustained by candlelight and anxiety. One of the footmen, perhaps the youngest, drops a spoon. The sound, though soft, rings like a gunshot. Every head twitches, every conversation falters for a second. The butler's glare is immediate and lethal. The servant's face pales, but he recovers quickly, replacing the spoon as though nothing happened. You feel a pang of sympathy. The poor boy just lived your worst fear in miniature. As the soup courses are cleared, you risk glancing around. Some guests dab delicately at their mouths, others don't bother. You mirror the cautious majority. The hostess meets your eyes for the briefest second, offering the faintest nod. Encouragement, perhaps, or warning. And as the footmen glide in with the next wave of plates, you realize the strangest part of all. This ritual, absurd and exhausting, is oddly soothing. The repetition, the predictability, the shared pretense, it lulls you, like clockwork ticking in the background or waves lapping against the hull of a ship. You take a quiet sip of sherry, thinking that maybe, just maybe, you'll survive this evening after all. Then, the next dish arrives, accompanied by 4 new forks, and you know in your heart survival was optimistic. The next course arrives like a glittering ambush, a full array of gleaming silverware neatly aligned like soldiers awaiting orders. You stare at it, trying not to panic. There are so many forks you could start a small agricultural revolution. The fish knife alone looks like a decorative weapon, its edge oddly curved, more for show than for slicing. The butler glides behind you, refilling glasses in total silence, and you wonder if he can sense your confusion. Welcome to the fork forest. Every piece of cutlery here has a purpose, and heaven help you if you mistake one for another. You glance discreetly to your left, observing the feathered lady again. She seems to know exactly what she's doing, which is either comforting or terrifying. She reaches for the outermost fork, fingers poised like a pianist, preparing for the opening note. You copy her, gently, gracefully, and hope the colonel to your right doesn't notice the mimicry. Victorians loved specialization. By the late 1800s, a well-to-do household might boast over 100 distinct types of silver utensils. There were pickle forks, pastry forks, oyster forks, fruit knives, even ice cream knives, a contradiction that defies both logic and dairy. Historians still argue whether this proliferation of tools represented peak refinement or peak absurdity. One camp calls it a triumph of civilization, another calls it a collective nervous breakdown with cutlery. The fish course is unveiled, a pale fillet glistening in lemon butter. The air smells faintly of salt and citrus. You clutch the fish knife, which you suddenly realize is not meant for cutting at all. It's shaped to separate the delicate flakes, not slice them. You press experimentally, and it slides like a whisper through the fish. Success. You almost smile. The colonel notices. Ah, he says approvingly, you handle the implements well. Not everyone does. There was a dreadful scene once in Brighton. Gentleman used his meat knife on the sole. Nearly started an uprising. You murmur something diplomatic about tragic misunderstandings of etiquette, though inwardly you're thinking, it's just dinner. But of course, it isn't. Here, dinner is theater, and everyone's reputation is on stage. You take your first bite, careful not to clink the fork against your teeth. The lemon tang cuts through the buttery richness, and you suddenly understand why Victorians took dining so seriously. When done right, it's perfection in miniature. But perfection is exhausting. The servants move in an endless loop, replacing plates, clearing crumbs, adjusting candles that don't need adjusting. You glance toward the end of the table and notice the hostess subtly flicking her wrist, a prearranged signal to the butler. It's the social equivalent of telepathy. One discreet gesture, and the tempo of the entire room changes. The next course will appear in precisely 2 minutes. Here's a mainstream historical fact to steady your mind. This entire system, the layering of forks, the sequence of dishes, the invisible orchestration of servants, was codified during Queen Victoria's reign as part of what scholars call the cult of domestic order. The table was a reflection of empire, everything in its place, hierarchy unquestioned, elegance masking anxiety. The lady to your left lowers her fork and dabs her lips with her napkin. Do you find these dinners tedious? She whispers, eyes sparkling with quiet rebellion. You hesitate. This feels like a trap. A bit, you admit. She chuckles. Ah, honesty. So refreshing. Don't worry, we all think the same. We just pretend otherwise. Her candor is oddly comforting. You take another small bite of fish, and she adds, there was talk last season of simplifying table service. Fewer forks, fewer rules, caused an uproar. They called it the Fork Rebellion. She says it lightly, but you can tell she's amused by the absurdity. Imagine people fearing a shortage of spoons as though civilization depended on it. It's a quirky tidbit, but it's true. In the 1870s, etiquette reformers tried advocating for service à la Russe, the modern course-by-course system, to replace the overwhelming spread of dishes and tools. It sparked genuine outrage among traditionalists who believed refinement was measured in silverware weight. Historians still argue whether this reform movement made dining more democratic or simply replaced one form of pretension with another. You picture a room full of scholars debating over salad forks and can't help smiling. Meanwhile, your fish knife wobbles precariously as you lift another piece. You catch it before it clatters, narrowly avoiding humiliation. The colonel nods approvingly again, as if you've passed a minor military exam. You're getting the hang of this. And then, tragedy in miniature. The lady's feather brushes against her glass, tipping it just enough to spill a few drops of wine. She freezes, mortified. The butler materializes instantly, napkin in hand, and within seconds, the disaster is erased. The conversation continues as though it never happened. You realize that this is the true genius of Victorian etiquette. It conceals chaos so elegantly you might mistake it for grace. The fish course ends. Servants sweep in, plates vanish. Crumbs are whisked away with silent precision. The table gleams again, untouched by evidence of human hunger. You lean back slightly, shoulders tense from maintaining perfect posture. Your back aches, but your pride doesn't dare admit it. The colonel begins talking about his time in India, voice low but insistent. Of course, he says, we introduce them to proper dining. You bite back the urge to ask who asked for that, instead nodding politely. Some jokes are best left unspoken when the silverware costs more than your annual salary. A bell rings softly. Somewhere, a servant coordinating the next course. The ritual continues. You feel yourself slipping into the rhythm again, the controlled movements, the quiet exchanges, the subtle power plays hidden in politeness. One final glance at the forks before you, now slightly rearranged from use. They shine under the candlelight, beautiful and absurd. You imagine future generations, people eating with mismatched utensils, scrolling phones at the table, elbows everywhere, and wonder what the Victorians would think. Probably faint dead away. As the plates are cleared, the colonel leans closer. You're doing splendidly, he whispers. Not everyone survives their first dinner. You laugh softly, pretending it's a joke, though you're not entirely sure it is. The next course is being carried in, a gleaming roast that smells of time and victory, and you realize the fork forest was only the first trial. The real test lies ahead. Your spine feels like it's been conscripted into military service. Each vertebra holds formation as you sit perfectly upright, every muscle performing its own silent duty. The roast beef has arrived, and the air is thick with the scent of browned fat, clove, and power. You've entered the realm of posture and poise, where even chewing must look elegant. You adjust your seat slightly, careful not to scrape the chair legs or jostle the tablecloth. The host, far down the table, looks perfectly serene, posture so straight it could serve as an architectural blueprint. You mimic that angle, chin level, shoulders drawn back just enough to imply grace, not discomfort. There's an art to appearing relaxed while your body is screaming for mercy. Historians still argue whether posture was truly about refinement or just another form of control. Some suggest it was a physical manifestation of morality. If your body was disciplined, so was your soul. Others believe it was purely aesthetic, designed to maintain the illusion that everyone present was carved from the same genteel marble. The butler steps forward with the carving knife, gliding it through the roast like a violin bow. Each slice lands on a plate with precision. The aroma of gravy rises, rich, peppery, faintly sweet. You brace your fork and knife, remembering the rules, elbows never on the table, wrists off the edge, forearms hovering with the grace of a tightrope walker. A mainstream historical fact, Victorian etiquette manuals often prescribed exact measurements for how far one's hands should rest from the edge of the plate, usually about an inch. Deviate too much, and you risk being labeled clumsy or, worse, provincial. One guide even suggested practicing in front of a mirror, balancing a book on your head while pretending to slice meat. You imagine generations of young debutantes wobbling like reluctant swans, desperate not to drop their dinner or their decorum. Across the table, conversation drifts like perfume, soft, pleasant, and mostly meaningless. Someone is discussing the superiority of gas lighting over candles. Another murmurs about the Queen's latest portrait. You nod occasionally, maintaining that delicate expression of interest that Victorians prized above actual engagement. The Colonel, ever vigilant, has begun speaking again, this time about the proper method of mounting a horse. You focus on cutting your meat into manageable portions, pretending the tablecloth holds the secrets of the universe. The lady to your left sighs softly, murmuring, "If only conversation were as tender as the beef." You stifle a laugh, nearly breaking posture. She catches your near smile and grins, triumphant. "Oh, don't look so alarmed. I promise humor isn't illegal. Yet." You relax a fraction. There's something soothing about small rebellion shared across candlelight. She takes another delicate bite, lowering her gaze. "You know," she whispers, "they say the trick is to imagine a string tied to the top of your head, pulling upward, keeping you tall. You try it. It works, sort of. You feel absurd. But your spine thanks you for the visualization. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some Victorian hosts allegedly placed slightly convex dinner chairs at their tables. The subtle curve prevented guests from slouching without their even realizing it. A dinner party, by design, could literally force good posture. The furniture was in on the act. Meanwhile, servants continue their silent ballet. A crumb sweeper passes behind you, a tiny brush and pan gliding along the linen like a stagehand resetting the scene. The efficiency is hypnotic. Every motion seems planned, choreographed, intentional. You wonder what it must be like to live every day by rules so intricate they govern how you hold a knife. Then again, in your own time, people spend hours debating coffee brewing ratios, so maybe humanity hasn't evolved much. The Colonel clears his throat, gesturing faintly toward the table. "Observe," he says, "how Lady Winslow never leans forward. Remarkable discipline. You could balance a coin on that back." You glance toward the woman in question. She's mid-conversation, smiling faintly, spine indeed as straight as a ruler. It's impressive, yes, but also terrifying. You imagine the toll of hours spent performing grace, ribs cinched by corsets, muscles trembling under silk and expectation. Historians still argue whether Victorian women truly believed in these ideals or were trapped by them. Diaries reveal both devotion and quiet rebellion. One entry from 1869 reads, "I have perfected my deportment, but my soul slouches." You silently salute her across time. A footman slides a dish of vegetables before you, carrots glistening in butter, peas bright as emeralds. The temptation to hunch forward, to rest your elbows just once, is unbearable. You resist, reminding yourself that etiquette is endurance disguised as elegance. You try a piece of beef, juicy, seasoned, almost worth the suffering. The lady to your left tilts her head. "You're doing quite well," she says quietly. "Most first-timers wilt by the third course." You whisper back, "I'm halfway wilted already." She laughs softly, a genuine sound amid the artificial civility. It's strange. Beneath the strictness, there's intimacy. Everyone here knows the rules, knows the exhaustion of maintaining them. It's a shared burden, a collective performance, Perhaps that's why they keep doing it. The relief of order in a chaotic world. A servant refills your wine. You thank him, though etiquette dictates you shouldn't acknowledge servants verbally. He gives the slightest nod, the kind that says thank you for breaking the rule but meaning it. You decide he's your favorite person in the room. Your back aches, your shoulders twinge, but you keep the posture because now it's personal. You will not slump. You are a monument to correct deportment, a tribute to centuries of needless discomfort. And yet, as you look around, the beauty of it catches you. The flicker of candlelight on polished glass, the rhythm of movements, the quiet murmur of controlled laughter. For a moment, you understand why the Victorians clung to this world. It's a fragile illusion of perfection, built fork by fork, vertebra by vertebra. The colonel finishes his wine and sighs contentedly. Posture, he says, tapping his chest, is the armor of civilization. You raise an eyebrow. Does that make slouching a revolution? He blinks, then chuckles. Perhaps. The servants clear the plates, and the air shifts again, lighter, almost conspiratorial. Dessert will come later, but for now conversation is the next battlefield. Your spine remains loyal, though it whispers mutiny. You take one last look at the candlelit table, realizing that tonight your body has learned a new language, one of restraint, elegance, and silent endurance. You breathe, slow and careful, and tell yourself you'll stretch later. For now, you sit perfectly poised, the picture of composure in a world that mistakes stiffness for grace. Conversation, you quickly discover, is the true test of a Victorian dinner. Forks and posture are nothing compared to the delicate art of small talk. Around you, a gentle hum rises as if the table itself exhales between courses. Wine glasses catch the candlelight, eyes meet briefly, and suddenly the air fills with murmured niceties about art, weather, and people's suspiciously remarkable nephews. You dab your mouth with a napkin, pretending confidence. Inside you're scrambling for something polite, intelligent, and non-controversial to say, ideally, in that order. The Victorians didn't just talk, they fenced with words. Every question was a feint, every anecdote a test of breeding. Historians still argue whether conversation manuals from the period were meant to educate or terrify. Some offered entire scripts, dictating how to sound agreeable without ever revealing a personal opinion. The colonel beside you clears his throat. So, he begins, how do you find London society? His tone implies that there is a correct answer. You smile faintly. Difficult to navigate, you say, like a crowded omnibus in the rain. He barks a laugh loud enough to make 3 heads turn. You've overperformed, but at least it's laughter and not scandal. The lady on your left leans in. You're braver than most, she whispers. Better to say something imperfect than say nothing at all. You wonder if she's right. Half the guests seem locked in cautious silence, nodding occasionally like ornamental birds. One man launches into a story about his uncle's trip to Naples, and everyone around him performs polite enthusiasm, smiling, murmuring, "How fascinating," every 20 seconds. A mainstream historical fact. During the mid-1800s, entire industries emerged to teach conversation deportment. Finishing schools trained young women in the proper rhythm of dialogue, never interrupt, never dominate, and never, under any circumstances, be interesting. For men, it was about restraint, wit, but not vulgarity, intellect, but never passion. The goal was to speak just enough to prove you belonged, then stop before you revealed you had thoughts. You attempt to contribute. I read recently, you begin, that the Queen's dogs dine better than most households. There's a ripple of polite laughter, small, safe, successful. The Colonel adds, "Quite right, too. Loyalty deserves mutton." A pause follows. You sense the conversational current shifting away from you, so you sip your wine and retreat gracefully. That's another unspoken rule. Know when to vanish from dialogue. Across the table, a gentleman with impressive sideburns is holding court about the dangers of the railway. It moves too fast, he insists, unnatural for the human frame. The others murmur in agreement, though several arrive tonight by train. You find it oddly comforting. Victorian small talk, like modern social media, thrives on mild hypocrisy. A quirky tidbit. Some hosts employed conversation cards, small slips placed discreetly beneath each guest's plate, printed with safe topics to discuss. Subjects range from the merits of seaside air to whether elephants feel homesick. Imagine needing written prompts to talk about the weather. Yet for the anxious guest, these cards were salvation, proof that one could survive an evening without stumbling into scandal. The lady beside you fans herself gently. "Did you see the new exhibit at the Royal Academy?" she asks. "All cherubs and moral lessons as usual." You nod. "I like the cherubs," you say, then pause. "They seem less judgmental than the critics." She laughs softly, eyes glinting with relief. It's a small victory, shared humor, within the boundaries of decorum. Historians still argue whether these exchanges truly reflected social connection or merely masked isolation. Some memoirs describe the dinner table as a theater of masks, where people spoke in polished riddles to hide the emptiness beneath. Yet others insist there was comfort in predictability, the way polite conversation insulated you from awkward truths. The Colonel, meanwhile, has begun another monologue about his hunting dogs, complete with sound effects. You nod sympathetically, as though each bark has personal meaning. "Remarkable creatures," he concludes, raising his glass. "Far more loyal than Parliament." Everyone chuckles dutifully. You wonder if dinner guests in the future will have to endure similar performances, perhaps about stock portfolios or podcasts. To your left, dessert plates are being arranged, a sign that the conversational baton is about to shift again. But before it does, the hostess catches your eye and smiles approvingly. Somehow she's noticed your careful participation. Maybe this is the true test, not dazzling people, but blending perfectly into the rhythm of their chatter. As servants clear plates, the sound of silver against porcelain fills the pauses. It's a strangely musical interlude, conversation fading, then rising again in waves. Someone mentions the weather, safe. Someone else mentions politics, not safe. And the entire table stiffens for one collective heartbeat. Then, mercifully, the pianist in the drawing room begins playing again, rescuing everyone with Chopin. You breathe easier. The melody smooths over awkward silences like velvet. You sip your wine, pretending to admire the music, though really you're savoring the reprieve from conversation. The Colonel finally falls quiet, entranced by his own reflection in the decanter. Still, the ritual fascinates you. Every smile, every nod, every "how charming" is both performance and armor. Beneath it lies a fragile truth, the desire to belong. Perhaps the Victorians weren't so different from anyone else. They just had better lighting and worse corsets. Here's another small oddity. In some elite circles, hosts hired conversation coaches to train their children for society. Imagine tutors drilling pupils on how to pretend to care about asparagus prices. One student reportedly fainted during practice, a tragic case of death by dullness, though history doesn't confirm if it's true. The wine circulates again. The air grows warmer, laughter easier. Maybe it's the alcohol loosening the edges of formality, or maybe the collective fatigue of etiquette makes rebellion feel tempting. The lady next to you leans closer. If you could say anything, she whispers, without consequence, what would you say? You hesitate. That I miss silence, you reply softly. She smiles wistfully. Then you're the most honest guest here. You glance around the candlelit table, the polished silver reflecting tired, pleasant faces. Beneath the chatter, you sense something deeper. Loneliness dressed as manners, longing disguised as laughter. The Victorians mastered restraint, but even they couldn't silence the human need for connection. As the next course approaches, something creamy and French, you realize you've passed another invisible test. You've spoken, listened, joked, and survived without scandal. You've learned to swim in the shallow end of conversation where the water looks calm but hides strong currents below. And as the hostess lifts her glass for a final toast before dessert, you can't help smiling. Small talk, it turns out, isn't small at all. It's the glue that keeps this precarious world from unraveling. You raise your glass, spine straight, voice steady. To civility, you murmur. To civility, they echo as the candles flicker like tiny, exhausted suns. The orchestra of spoons begins its overture. A hush ripples around the table as servants appear with bowls of steaming soup, velvety, golden, perfumed with nutmeg and anxiety. This is the course of silence. The Victorians believed soup should be consumed quietly, reverently, as though it were a religious sacrament rather than flavored water. You lift your spoon, the silver-catching candlelight, and try to remember the sacred geometry of the movement, away from you, then toward your mouth, never the reverse. It's astonishing how much of dinner is about not making noise. You tilt the bowl just enough to scoop without clinking. Across the table, a gentleman inhales a little too enthusiastically, and the faint slurp draws 3 disapproving glances. You see him blush. Even soup, apparently, can shame a man. Historians still argue whether this obsession with quiet dining was about manners or paranoia. Some say it stemmed from the idea that civilization meant controlling every bodily sound. Others claim it was simply class theater, the rich proving they were too refined for messy human noises. Either way, the result is the same. You're terrified of breathing too loud. You let the warmth of the broth soothe your nerves. It's potage à la reine again. Chicken, almonds, cream, and the faint hint of tedium. The flavor is delicate, almost apologetic. Victorian cuisine often valued restraint over taste. The goal was refinement, not pleasure. Eating was another form of performance, measured, elegant, and entirely devoid of slurps. The colonel beside you lowers his spoon between bites, pausing as though composing a military report. "A fine soup," he says gravely, "light but dignified." You nod, resisting the urge to laugh. The lady on your left murmurs something about the texture being most commendable. You realize everyone here speaks of food as if it has moral qualities. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In high society, soup was traditionally the first proper course because it demonstrated the host's refinement. The consistency had to be perfect. Thin enough to drink, thick enough to stay on the spoon. Too watery, and you were accused of stinginess. Too thick, and you were accused of vulgarity. It was, quite literally, a balancing act. A servant refills your glass, moving like a shadow. The only sound is the soft rustle of linen and the occasional clink of metal against china. You try to relax, but the silence amplifies every movement. You hear your own swallow. You hear someone's stomach betray them with a faint growl. The colonel coughs discreetly into his napkin, which somehow makes it worse. Then comes the most dreaded of all noises, a spoon dropped against porcelain. The sound slices through the quiet like a church bell. Every guest freezes. A young woman at the far end of the table turns crimson. The hostess gives a smile so tight it could cut glass. Within seconds, a servant replaces the spoon, and conversation resumes as though nothing happened. You marvel at how Victorians could reset an entire emotional landscape in one polite breath. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some etiquette manuals recommended placing a folded slice of bread beneath the soup plate to absorb drips and prevent clattering when lifting it. It was a little-known insurance policy against humiliation. Imagine inventing bread as a soundproofing device. The colonel finishes his bowl and sets down his spoon with exaggerated care. You do the same, aligning it perfectly on the plate. There's a particular rhythm to it. Pause, wipe, place. If you cross the spoon over the bowl, it means, I'm still eating. Parallel means, I surrender. You surrender. The servants descend again, clearing bowls so deftly you hardly notice, until yours is gone. Fresh plates appear, gleaming and bare, as if the last 20 minutes of stress never happened. The silence breaks. A few cautious conversations bloom again, as though the soup course has exercised everyone's nerves. Such a lovely broth, murmurs a lady down the table. Indeed, her neighbor replies. Not a whisper of garlic. You suppress a smile. Garlic, in Victorian England, was culinary blasphemy. Too foreign, too bold, too French. You imagine entire dinner parties fainting at the scent of modern pesto. Historians still argue whether these culinary aversions reflected xenophobia or just bad digestion. Either way, the English palate of the era was an exercise in beige moderation. Everything was seasoned with discretion. You glance around the table realizing how perfectly composed everyone looks. Candles flicker, jewels glint, posture remains impeccable. But beneath the surface calm, you can sense the exhaustion. These people are performing harmony, pretending contentment, suppressing every itch, cough, and thought. It's magnificent and mildly tragic. The hostess catches your gaze again and smiles. The same carefully measured smile she's given a dozen times tonight. You return it, understanding now that this is her true art, managing the mood of the room with nothing but expressions and timing. A single misstep could ruin the illusion of effortless grace. A footman offers bread rolls. You take one, breaking it gently. Butter is served in delicate curls, and of course, there's a proper method. Use the small butter knife, spread only enough for one bite at a time. Never saw through the roll like a barbarian. You follow the ritual, your movements now smoother, calmer. There's something hypnotic about submitting to such rules. Once you surrender, you stop worrying. The lady beside you leans closer, whispering, if you make it through the soup without incident, they'll forgive anything else. You grin. Why? She shrugs lightly. Because soup is honesty. No one can fake quiet. You think about that. Maybe that's why this moment feels strangely intimate. Dozens of people united in shared silence, pretending serenity while fearing the same betrayal of sound. You imagine future dinners, centuries later, filled with phones buzzing and forks clattering, and wonder which world is truly noisier. The colonel takes his final sip, wipes his mustache, and declares, "Splendid restraint." You resist the urge to ask if he means the soup or himself. The next course approaches, carried in under a shimmer of silver domes. Conversation revives, tentative at first, then livelier. You feel your shoulders loosen. The worst, perhaps, is behind you, at least until the fish knives return. You sip your wine again, savoring the warmth. Maybe silence isn't so bad, you think. Maybe it's the only honest sound at the table. The scent of the sea arrives before the servants do. Salt and lemon, butter and pride. The fish course has entered the battlefield, and already you can feel the tension. Every guest knows this is the trickiest round of the evening. Forks are one thing, but fish has its own arsenal of weapons, and the rules for their deployment are absurdly precise. A procession of footmen sweeps in, bearing silver platters that shimmer like mirrors. Beneath the lids lies filet of sole à la Normande, delicate and pale, floating in cream sauce so glossy it reflects candlelight. The host nods almost imperceptibly, and the servants begin their synchronized descent, placing plates before guests with unbroken rhythm. You take your first look at the tools laid out beside your plate and feel your pulse quicken. There it is again, that strange curved knife, flatter than usual, blunted at the tip, more like a prop than an instrument. The fish fork gleams beside it, smaller, with shorter tines, designed to cradle rather than stab. The colonel to your right catches your expression and smirks. "Don't worry," he murmurs. "It's not for surgery." A low ripple of laughter passes down the table as someone makes a similarly cautious attempt at the dish. The sauce threatens to slide off in slow rebellion. Fish, unlike roast beef or fowl, is delicate. It flakes, disintegrates, and exposes the unprepared. This is why the Victorians invented special cutlery for it, to tame a creature already dead. A mainstream historical fact. The fish knife emerged in the 1870s, during the height of dining formality. At first, it caused controversy. Traditionalists claimed silver ruined the flavor, while progressives praised its hygiene and grace. Etiquette experts eventually decreed it essential. The result? Another layer of social anxiety disguised as refinement. You glance discreetly to your left, watching the lady's technique. She uses the knife to lift the flesh in perfect flakes, separating it from invisible bones with the delicacy of a watchmaker. You imitate her, and for a fleeting moment, the motion feels natural, like tracing a pattern you've always known. The colonel murmurs, "You handle it well. My compliments." His tone suggests you've passed an unspoken exam. You exhale quietly, hoping not to reveal how close you were to impaling the lemon garnish by mistake. A quirky tidbit. Some guests, terrified of mishandling the fish course, would secretly practice at home with cheap utensils and sardines. There are even diary entries describing mock dinners held for this purpose. A dry run for social survival. You picture drawing room rehearsals, with servants pretending to be butlers, while their employers perfected wrist angles. It's both ridiculous and oddly touching. Historians still argue whether this mania for dining discipline was truly about civility or simply an arms race of manners. Each new implement, the fish knife, the asparagus tongs, the marrow spoon, became a way to signal education, taste, and disposable income. In a sense, the Victorian table was a microcosm of empire, expansion for the sake of order, control masquerading as elegance. You spear a sliver of soul, let it melt on your tongue. The flavor is rich, buttery, faintly sweet from the wine reduction. It's delicious, but you eat as though handling a live grenade. Around you, murmurs of approval drift like smoke. Exquisite sauce, someone says. Superb delicacy, adds another. The colonel raises his glass in solemn salute. Fish, he intones, is the test of a man's breeding. You nod, silently promising never to order it again. The lady beside you leans in, whispering, I heard a story once of a viscount's daughter who refused to eat fish because she feared the bones. You smile politely. Was she mocked for it? Oh, no, she says, eyes twinkling. She was admired. They said she'd rather starve than risk vulgarity. You nearly laugh, then remember where you are. Instead, you sip your wine, suppressing amusement. The idea that hunger could be a virtue seems both absurd and perfectly Victorian. They starved for decorum the way monks starved for holiness. The butler hovers nearby, watching for signals. Each guest has their own private semaphore. Forks laid together, napkins folded just so, glasses positioned to indicate readiness. You rest your utensils parallel, indicating surrender. Within seconds, your plate is whisked away, as if it never existed. It's a strange, theatrical dance. The servants glide like clockwork figures, their timing flawless. You realize the entire household is one great machine, turning on invisible gears of habit and hierarchy. Every gesture means something. Every silence carries weight. And yet, there's humor here, too. The colonel recounts, sotto voce, the tale of the Fish Fork Rebellion, an actual dinner in 1881 where a guest, disgusted by excessive silverware, simply refused to use the fish knife. Caused quite the scandal, he says. The hostess fainted. The newspapers got wind of it. Can you imagine? You grin. A revolutionary with a dinner plate. Exactly, he says, though, of course, he was never invited again. The conversation drifts toward safer waters, yachting, seafood markets, the state of the Thames. Positively aromatic, someone quips. You mostly listen, offering the occasional nod or well-timed indeed. The rhythm is hypnotic, the repetition strangely soothing. Historians still debate whether Victorians found joy in this ritual or simply feared deviation. Perhaps it was both, a dance between pride and pressure, duty and pleasure. The table is a stage, the guests actors, and etiquette the script no one dares to rewrite. The lady to your left sets down her fork with a sigh. There, she says softly, one course closer to freedom. You laugh under your breath. Does dessert count as freedom? Oh no, she replies, eyes mischievous. Dessert is diplomacy. The colonel overhears and chuckles. Diplomacy indeed. Many a marriage has been negotiated over pudding. He leans closer. You'll see. The sweets are merely a test of restraint. The plates vanish again, replaced by new glasses, lighter wines, sweeter aromas. The transition is seamless, almost mechanical. The orchestra of dining continues, each course a movement in a grand symphony of manners. You lean back slightly, careful to maintain posture. Your reflection wavers in the glass of your water goblet, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. A survivor of the fish course. You can't help smiling. Somewhere between the absurdity and the grace, you're beginning to enjoy it. Not the rules themselves, but the strange calm they create. The hostess lifts her glass, signaling another toast. To refinement, she says, and to the art of civility. You clink glasses, half ironically, half sincerely. Perhaps this is what civility means, pretending together until the pretense feels almost true. And as the servants glide in with the roast, you realize that for all the stiffness and ceremony, this table, this glittering, suffocating theater, isn't really about food. It's about the desperate, beautiful need to belong. The roast arrives like a coronation, heralded by the smell of caramelized fat, thyme, and triumph. Platters gleam, juices shimmer, and somewhere a faint hiss of gravy meets candlelight. The servants carry it as if transporting sacred relics, an enormous joint of beef, browned to perfection, haloed in steam. You realize you've been holding your breath. The carving begins. The host, presiding at the head of the table, rises to his full height and takes up the knife like a monarch claiming a sword. His motions are slow and deliberate, slicing with precision that borders on reverence. Conversation dims to a respectful murmur. You're watching ceremony disguised as dinner. Victorians didn't just serve meat, they displayed it. The main course was the centerpiece, proof of abundance, prosperity, and control. A properly carved roast symbolized not only culinary skill, but moral rectitude. Historians still argue whether this obsession with presentation reflected genuine pride in craftsmanship or sheer anxiety about appearances. Either way, it meant every guest witnessed a ritual of order before they took their first bite. You glance toward the colonel, who seems entranced. "Beautiful," he whispers, as though admiring a painting. The lady beside you rolls her eyes just slightly. "It's meat, not Michelangelo," she murmurs under her breath. You suppress a grin. When your portion arrives, the plate is a study in symmetry. 2 slices of beef, a scoop of potatoes, a hint of greens. You can practically hear your modern self whispering, "Where's the sauce?" But of course, there's a rule for that too. A footman materializes with a sauce boat. The colonel intercepts it first, pouring with gravity. "Always clockwise," he says. "Never against the circle." He passes it to you, and you repeat the gesture, terrified you'll drip. A single spot of gravy on the linen would be social homicide. You manage the pour, barely. Success, once again, measured in silence. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian roast dinners often featured a parade of sauces, each signaling class and taste. Horseradish was respectable, but too much marked you as crude. Mint sauce suggested tradition, anchovy butter, daring cosmopolitanism. The truly refined were expected to appreciate subtlety, the flavor of restraint itself. You take a bite. The meat is tender, smoky, perfectly pink in the middle. It's delicious, though your jaw protests the effort of polite chewing. Across the table, conversation begins to swell again. People are more relaxed now. Wine has loosened the collective spine. Even the hostess laughs, a small crystalline sound that seems to release tension from the entire room. The colonel launches into a tale about a dinner in India involving a wayward goat and an unfortunate misunderstanding of curry powder. His booming voice fills the air, and everyone chuckles, relieved to have something safely ridiculous to enjoy. The lady beside you leans over and whispers, "He tells that story every time. The goat gets more heroic with each retelling." You stifle a laugh, and she smiles like a co-conspirator. Historians still debate whether Victorian humor was as stiff as their posture, but evidence suggests not. Beneath the layers of propriety, these people craved laughter. Even etiquette books occasionally allowed a sanctioned chuckle, so long as it was light, melodic, and not directed at others' expense, which, of course, makes it utterly joyless. You chew thoughtfully, noticing how everyone eats at roughly the same pace. No one hurries, no one lags. It's as though they're bound by an invisible metronome. You take a sip of claret, perfectly timed. The wine is rich, dry, and pleasantly warming, the kind of drink that almost convinces you you're having fun. The lady across the table suddenly drops her fork. It hits the plate with a soft clatter, nothing catastrophic, but enough to draw glances. She recovers quickly, murmuring an apology. The hostess gives her a sympathetic smile, and the butler replaces the fork in a heartbeat. No fuss, no embarrassment, just the restoration of order. You exhale quietly. The rules, as oppressive as they are, do have their mercy. A quirky tidbit. Etiquette guides of the time warned against cutting all your food at once. Doing so marked you as uncouth, the mark of the tradesman, one book sniffed. Instead, one must cut and eat each bite individually, proving both patience and self-control. Imagine dinner as a test of willpower where even your chewing rhythm is a moral statement. The roast course progresses in a blur of silver and conversation. Someone mentions hunting. Someone else laments the cost of imported spices. You find yourself strangely entranced by the glint of the candelabra reflected in wine glasses. The light trembles as if the whole table breathes in sync. The colonel, ever the educator, lowers his voice conspiratorially. "There's debate, you know," he says, "about elbows." You blink. "Elbows?" He nods gravely. "Some say one may rest a forearm on the table between courses. Others insist it's barbarous." He sips his wine. "I maintain moderation. A man must occasionally rest, but never sprawl." Historians, amusingly, still argue the same point. Period paintings show diners with their arms artfully bent, but manuals from the time contradict them. One etiquette writer declared that the elbow is the devil's lever. Strong words for a joint. You decide not to test the theory tonight. The meat dwindles, conversation deepens. The room is warmer now, perfumed with candle wax and satisfaction. Servants glide in once more, collecting plates, brushing crumbs, resetting the stage. You lean back, careful not to seem too comfortable. The lady beside you tilts her head. "Do you ever wonder," she says softly, "whether any of this makes the food taste better?" You pause. "No," you admit, "but it does make the wine taste necessary." She laughs, quiet, genuine, and for the first time all evening, you feel a sliver of real ease. As dessert preparations begin in the distance, the hostess stands. Conversation halts. Forks freeze midair. She lifts her glass, elegant and steady. "To our guests," she says, smiling directly at you, "and to the spirit of civility that sustains us all." Glasses rise, clink softly. You drink, letting the warmth spread. For a moment, the rules fade, replaced by something simpler, a shared human rhythm, fragile but real. When the toast ends, servants appear again, collecting the last traces of the main course. The plates vanish. The silver gleams anew. You breathe out slowly. The battle of the roast is over. But as you glance down the table, at the flickering lights, the serene faces, the faint haze of satisfaction, you sense something lingering beneath the order, exhaustion, longing, maybe even hunger of another kind. Still, you survived, and in Victorian society, survival was the finest etiquette of all. The main course has been conquered, but there's no chance to relax. You've entered the secret realm of vegetables, servants, and silent signals, a world where peas can ruin reputations and potatoes serve as moral lessons. The plates are cleared, napkins refolded, and suddenly the table seems reborn, gleaming and bare again. You glance down its glittering length, realizing that the real power at this dinner doesn't belong to the guests at all. It's in the quiet choreography of those who move around you. The servants reappear, gliding as if on invisible tracks, each carrying trays balanced with precision that borders on supernatural. Steam curls from bowls of buttered carrots, asparagus, and the ever-dangerous green pea. Each dish is offered in turn, starting from the hostess's right and spiraling clockwise like a well-rehearsed dance. You sense how much timing matters here. One step too quick, one wrong direction, and the illusion of perfection shatters. Victorian dining was a symphony of control, and the servants were its unseen musicians. A mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, an upper-class household could have as many as 10 servants dedicated solely to dining. Footmen, butlers, under-butlers, and even a scullery maid for cutlery polishing. Entire lives were devoted to ensuring your spoon never bore a smudge. The family's prestige rested not just on wealth, but on the flawless invisibility of the help. You notice the subtle choreography now. One servant watches the hostess's hands, another shadows the host's wine glass. When she shifts her fingers slightly, a coded flick of the wrist, the sequence begins anew. Plates move, glasses refill, dishes glide like ghosts. It's mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. You wonder how long it takes to learn this invisible language. The lady beside you catches your eye. "It's like clockwork," she whispers, only quieter. She's right. Every rustle of linen, every soft footfall, feels calculated to sustain calm. But beneath it lies exhaustion, the unacknowledged hum of labor. You look again at the footman nearest you, his face expressionless, his steps precise. His world, you realize, is just as bound by etiquette as yours. Only his silence is enforced, not chosen. Historians still argue whether Victorian domestic service was viewed as noble duty or quiet servitude. The truth likely falls somewhere in between. Some servants took immense pride in their work, writing memoirs about the art of discretion. Others left diaries describing aching feet, long hours, and the constant fear of dismissal for spilling gravy on lace. You think about the symmetry of it all. The guests striving to appear effortless, the servants striving to make their effort invisible. The butler stops beside you, silver tray in hand. "Peas, sir, or madam," he murmurs softly. The bowl tilts toward you like a test. You remember the rule: never scoop, never chase, and above all, never let a pea escape. It's a treacherous food, small and spherical, capable of humiliating even the confident. You take a few carefully, steadying your spoon against the serving edge, and somehow deposit them on your plate intact. Victory, tiny and green. The colonel beside you grunts approvingly. "Well executed," he says. "Last season, a gentleman lost 3 peas to the carpet, didn't recover socially for months." You almost laugh, but stop yourself when you realize he's entirely serious. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some etiquette instructors actually recommended avoiding peas entirely if one doubted their skill. The risk outweighs the nourishment, one manual advised. Others suggested mashing them discreetly with a fork to prevent runaway accidents, though this, too, risked condemnation if overdone. You glance at your peas, wondering how something so innocent could wield so much menace. The conversation drifts around you, lazy and warm from wine. You catch snippets, praise for the asparagus crop, jokes about overcooked carrots, speculation about whether the queen eats cabbage. The absurdity of it all makes you want to grin, but you suppress it. After all, smiling too broadly might be mistaken for mockery. A young servant leans forward to refill your water glass. His hand trembles slightly. He can't be more than 15. You nod your thanks, but he doesn't reply. He can't. The colonel clears his throat disapprovingly. Best not encourage them, he murmurs. Too familiar. You feel a pang of guilt. Familiarity, apparently, is as dangerous as dropping a pea. Historians still debate the morality of this distance, the cultivated separation between those who served and those served. Some Victorians justified it as preserving dignity on both sides. Others condemned it as dehumanizing. Either way, every movement tonight feels like part of a ritual designed to keep empathy just out of reach. The lady on your left rescues you from the awkward silence. I once read, she says, that in some houses servants weren't allowed to look directly at the family. She lowers her voice conspiratorially. Can you imagine eating while someone pretends not to see you? You can, actually. It's happening right now. You push a carrot gently across your plate, wondering how much conversation you could fuel with this single dish. The Victorians could make an entire evening's discourse out of vegetable texture. Firm, yet yielding, someone declares at the far end. A metaphor for the perfect gentleman, replies another. Polite laughter follows. You take another careful bite, chewing slowly, posture unyielding. A servant passes again, carrying a dish of cauliflower au gratin. The smell is divine, nutmeg and cheese, rare luxury in a restrained world. You accept a small serving, noting the precise motion of the ladle. Not too much, never heap your plate. Gluttony, after all, is the fastest route to disgrace. The colonel leans toward you again, lowering his voice. Do you know, he says, I once dined beside a man who asked a servant for more potatoes before the hostess offered. Never saw him again. His tone is part warning, part legend. You nod gravely, as if hearing a ghost story. The table glows now with soft candlelight, the haze of wine, and the low hum of satisfied chatter. The vegetables vanish, the servants retreat, and a fragile stillness settles. You sense the next phase approaching, dessert, with its own arsenal of spoons and subtleties. You take a moment to glance around, watching how the butler surveys his domain, how the hostess's gaze travels the table like a conductor ensuring harmony. It's breathtaking, really. The coordination, the control, the way chaos hides just beneath the silver surface. And you, sitting amid it all, realize how strange it feels to be both participant and observer, to belong and not belong at once. Every movement you make is borrowed grace, every smile a borrowed script, and yet it's working. You haven't dropped a fork or started a revolution. The colonel wipes his mustache, satisfied. Well, he declares, a fine dinner, civilized. You can't resist. Indeed, you murmur. No casualties among the peas. He pauses, then chuckles, a deep, rare sound. You've earned it. The plates are lifted again, vanishing into the ether. The candles flicker. Somewhere, faintly, the pianist in the next room begins another waltz, soft and slow. The air smells faintly of fruit and sugar. The servants reappear with delicate crystal dishes, and you realize the final acts of this performance are about to begin. The next wave of refinement glides in on the scent of grape and courage. Wine, the liquid diplomacy of the Victorian table, has arrived to both soothe and endanger you. The servants move like a tide of glass and silver, each footstep inaudible, each pour perfectly measured. Crystal stems catch the candlelight, casting tiny rainbows across linen so white it could shame snow. You glance down at your place setting and realize, to your growing horror, that there are now 6 glasses in front of you. 6. They stand in formation, delicate, curving, some tall and narrow, others squat and solemn. It's a miniature army of etiquette. You suddenly understand why the Victorians believed in hierarchy. Without it, they'd never have remembered which glass was which. A mainstream historical fact. The standard dinner sequence of the era often included multiple wines: sherry or Madeira with soup, white wine with fish, claret or burgundy with meat, champagne with dessert, and port or liqueurs afterward. Each glass had its moment, and drinking the wrong one at the wrong time was social malpractice. Guests were expected to sip, not drain. The goal was steady intoxication without the inconvenience of showing it. The colonel beside you is clearly an expert in this dangerous art. He swirls his claret, eyes half-lidded, murmuring something about legs and lineage. You nod, pretending to understand the poetry of wine viscosity. The lady to your left smiles knowingly. "Don't worry," she whispers. "He's been admiring his claret since the Crimean War." You lift your own glass, careful to tilt at the correct angle, 45 degrees or thereabouts. The scent is deep and warm like polished wood and plum. One cautious sip, and the tension in your shoulders softens just enough to feel decadent. Around the table, the hum of voices grows a shade louder, the laughter easier. The machinery of civility is finally running on oil. Historians still argue whether the Victorian fondness for elaborate wine rituals was about pleasure or power. Some say it reflected genuine connoisseurship. Others suspect it was another social filter, an excuse to judge those who didn't know the difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy. Either way, you can feel its purpose tonight, to blur the sharp edges of discomfort. A servant appears with another bottle, champagne this time. You catch the faint pop of the cork, muted for decorum, and the fizzing whisper as the liquid hits crystal. Bubbles rise in disciplined columns, as if even carbonation must follow rules. The colonel accepts his glass with reverence. "Ah," he sighs, "civilization in liquid form." You take a cautious sip. The sweetness hits first, then a faint bitterness. It tastes like joy carefully restrained, just enough sparkle to suggest rebellion under the starch. The lady beside you leans closer. "It's the one moment," she says softly, "where everyone pretends not to notice they're getting pleasantly drunk." You grin. "Pleasantly?" She shrugs, until someone hiccups. A quirky tidbit. Hiccups were a genuine fear at dinners like this. Etiquette manuals warned guests against indelicate gastric disturbances, recommending remedies such as holding one's breath behind a napkin or pretending to cough discreetly. There are even recorded instances of guests fainting rather than risk an audible burp. You picture an entire era tiptoeing through its own biology. The host raises his glass for another toast. "To friendship and fortitude," he declares, "and to those who know when to stop." Laughter follows, light, indulgent, just tipsy enough to feel human. You join in, clinking gently, the crystal ring echoing through the room like distant bells. As the servants circulate again, pouring, refilling, retreating, you notice how seamlessly they anticipate needs. No one ever has to ask. A mere glance, a half-lowered glass, and the refill appears. It's a kind of clairvoyance born from repetition and expectation. You find yourself wondering if the butler could sense your internal panic about the fork forest earlier. Probably. The colonel grows philosophical under the influence. You know, he says, wine is the great equalizer. You can't fake appreciation. You either feel it or you don't. He takes another sip, then adds, but of course the French still overdo it. The lady on your left murmurs, the French overdo everything, earning a ripple of amusement from nearby guests. The sound of laughter feels different now, looser, warmer, almost conspiratorial. The starch of the evening begins to soften. Someone at the far end of the table tells a story about a shipwreck involving champagne barrels. Another guest insists he once met a duke who could identify wine by smell alone. The host pretends to believe him. You take another sip, and for the first time tonight, the rules feel less oppressive. Maybe that's the trick. Etiquette isn't meant to be obeyed forever. It's meant to dissolve gracefully under the right vintage. Even the servants seem a fraction slower, their movements less mechanical, as though the collective tension of the household has eased. Historians still debate whether Victorians actually drank as much as their tableware implied. Some evidence suggests many guests simply pretended to sip, letting the wine warm their hands but not their heads. Yet diaries tell another story of late-night singing, laughter, and, occasionally, scandalous proposals whispered in candlelight. Perhaps both are true. Restraint in public, release in private. The lady beside you studies her champagne, lost in the shimmer of the bubbles. It's strange, she murmurs, all this ceremony, and yet we still drink to forget the ceremony itself. You nod. A very polite rebellion, she smiles. The only kind we're allowed. You sense a kind of collective sigh around the table, the room exhaling centuries of propriety in a single, civilized breath. Even the hostess looks momentarily human, her smile softer, her eyes less calculating. The music from the drawing room drifts through the doorway, something slow and sentimental. And then it happens. The faintest hiccup from the far end of the table. A lady freezes, mortified. All eyes flick toward her for one terrible heartbeat. The colonel covers the moment with booming laughter, raising his glass again. To health, he declares. To laughter. The tension breaks, replaced by applause and nervous giggles. The lady exhales in gratitude, and life goes on. You sip your final mouthful of champagne, feeling warmth spread through your limbs. The servants begin clearing glasses with the grace of ghosts, leaving behind faint rings of condensation like fleeting footprints. The table feels lighter now, less like a battlefield, more like the aftermath of a truce. As the dessert plates appear, porcelain so delicate it might dissolve under moonlight, you realize how cleverly this course was timed. Wine has loosened tongues, softened edges, and prepared everyone for the final test, eating fruit as though it's a moral challenge. The colonel winks. Steady yourself, he murmurs. Dessert's where the real casualties happen. You laugh, the sound quiet and genuine. Maybe he's right. Maybe etiquette, like wine, is best taken in small, forgiving sips. The first whiff of sugar feels almost scandalous after so much restraint. The servants glide forward with crystal dishes, porcelain plates, and trays of fruit, that gleam like stolen jewels. The candles catch on the grapes, the oranges, the cherries. The entire table suddenly looks alive again. This is dessert, and it's not just a sweet ending. It's diplomacy, seduction, and survival, all in one glittering course. You watch as a footman presents the offerings in order of perceived politeness. Custards first, creams next, then the fruits, each carried like treasure from another world. The lady to your left leans toward you. "You've made it this far," she whispers. "Don't lose your nerve now." The colonel clears his throat. "I always say," he proclaims, "the measure of civilization is how one handles a peach." You almost laugh, but he's completely serious. In the Victorian world, fruit was both a test and a metaphor. To eat it elegantly required discipline. To refuse it implied fragility. A mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, dessert courses had become miniature exhibitions of empire. Pineapples from the Caribbean, oranges from Spain, bananas from Jamaica. They were more than food. They were trophies of global reach. Serving exotic fruit proved you could afford to import summer in the middle of winter. Historians still argue whether this was about sophistication or sheer colonial swagger. Either way, it turned every bite into politics. Your plate arrives, a perfect slice of plum tart, a few raspberries, and one shining banana, sliced diagonally like a secret warning. You recall the whispers about the banana scandal. Supposedly, an unknowing guest once peeled and bit into the fruit with his hands at a Mayfair dinner. Gasps, fainting, eternal exile. You grip your dessert fork with new respect. Here's a quirky tidbit. Etiquette manuals advise that bananas be eaten with a knife and fork, never peeled by hand. The diner was to slice the skin lengthwise, fold it back neatly, and then cut the fruit into bite-sized pieces, each speared delicately before reaching the mouth. Anything else was deemed suggestive or animalistic. You can practically hear the collective horror of 1,000 Victorians clutching their pearls. You begin carefully, following the invisible choreography. The fruit yields easily under the silver blade, soft and fragrant. The colonel watches approvingly. "Excellent form," he says. "I once saw a marquess attempt to eat a pear whole. We had to retire the linen." The lady on your left suppresses a smile. "They call this refinement," she murmurs. "But truly, it's survival training in silk." You nod, chewing thoughtfully. The tart melts on your tongue, sweet, buttery, alive with lemon zest. It's the first genuinely joyful flavor of the evening. Around you, conversation flares back to life, fueled by sugar and champagne. Topics grow lighter, more personal. Someone praises a new novel by Dickens. Someone else recounts a disastrous picnic involving bees. The laughter that follows sounds looser, warmer. You realize that dessert is where people finally breathe again. Historians still debate whether the Victorians truly enjoyed their own formality or were trapped by it. Some diaries describe dinners as exhausting pageants. Others celebrate them as the highest form of civilized pleasure. Perhaps both were true. Pleasure and performance braided so tightly that no one could tell them apart. You reach for the crystal bowl of strawberries, noticing how every guest does so with identical precision. No reaching, no leaning. Each waits for the servant to offer them. Even the act of accepting fruit must look rehearsed. The butler moves between you and the colonel like a conductor ensuring rhythm. The air smells faintly of vanilla and ambition. A footman offers a decanter of sweet dessert wine. You nod, and the amber liquid catches the candlelight like honey. It coats your glass, thick and syrupy. The first sip is heaven, sugary, indulgent, almost defiant. The lady beside you sighs. At last, she whispers, something that doesn't pretend to be modest. The colonel chuckles. Careful, he says. Too much, and you'll find yourself confessing opinions. You grin, and that would be unforgivable. Utterly, he says, eyes twinkling, though rather refreshing. You notice the hostess now, her movements measured but less tense. She watches the room with satisfaction, the hard part done. The atmosphere softened by sweetness. Even the servants seem lighter, their steps no longer quite so rigid. Perhaps dessert isn't just a course, but a reward, for them as much as for you. Here's another small curiosity. Some houses kept special ice plates, shallow dishes chilled on marble slabs so that sorbets wouldn't melt. In an age before electric refrigeration, this was wizardry. Guests marveled not just at the flavor, but at the possibility. Coldness in a warm, candlelit room. Victorians adored anything that hinted at mastery over nature, even frozen fruit. The colonel finishes his plate and sighs contentedly. A fine ending, he declares. Simple, restrained. The lady beside you laughs softly. You call pineapples and imported sugar restrained? He raises an eyebrow. Compared to the French? Absolutely. The conversation drifts toward scandal again, the small, safe kind. Someone mentions a duchess who once dropped a cherry onto her décolletage during dessert and became a legend overnight. You nearly choke on your wine. The lady beside you pats your arm gently. Careful, she whispers. Cherry accidents can be fatal. The servants begin clearing plates, the clink of porcelain and glass weaving into the hum of conversation. You lean back, pleasantly full, feeling the first true wave of relaxation since the evening began. The sugar and wine have worked their alchemy. The candles seem softer now, the music from the drawing room sweeter. You catch yourself smiling without caution. Maybe this is the trick. Endure the rules long enough, and eventually they melt away like sugar on the tongue. Even the colonel looks human now, his laughter booming but warm. The lady beside you tilts her glass toward yours. To dessert diplomacy, she toasts quietly, where everyone finally admits they're tired of pretending. You clink her glass gently. To pretending beautifully, you reply. The room ripples with laughter, chatter, and the faint ring of silver against glass. Somewhere a servant opens the door to the drawing room, and a fresh breeze drifts through, scented faintly with roses and freedom. The dinner is nearly done. Only the final rituals remain. Gendered exiles, cigars, and small rebellions whispered under the chandelier. But for now, as the last crumbs of tart disappear and the final sip of sweetness lingers, you allow yourself to feel it, the quiet victory of having navigated an entire evening without scandal, without spills, without exile by banana. The laughter fades into a hush as the hostess rises from her chair, smiling that precise porcelain smile that means one thing only: segregation is about to begin. The men and women will soon part ways, each retreating to their own realm of sanctioned conversation. It's a transition as rigid as the silver settings and just as revealing. The hostess murmurs something soft to the table, "Shall we?" And the women stand in a rustle of silk and perfume. Chairs slide back in near unison. The men rise, but remain standing, heads slightly bowed as the ladies file out toward the drawing room like a procession of pastel ghosts. You follow them with your eyes, catching a swirl of satin, a fan snapping shut, the faint jingle of bracelets. The door closes behind them with the quiet finality of a stage curtain. Now, the tone changes. The remaining men settle back into their chairs, freed from the presence of etiquette's sternest judge, feminine grace. The colonel exhales audibly. "At last," he mutters, loosening his collar by an imperceptible inch. A butler appears with decanters of port, the scent dark and velvety, and a small cedar box of cigars. You can feel the atmosphere thickening, warm and conspiratorial. A mainstream historical fact. This after-dinner division of the sexes was not just tradition, it was ideology. Men were expected to linger over brandy and political debate, while women withdrew to parlors to discuss fashion, charity, and other delicate subjects. It was thought that each sex needed a space free from the corrupting influence of the other's interests. Historians still argue whether this custom preserved dignity or simply reinforced inequality. Either way, it created two different worlds under the same roof. The colonel gestures to the cigars. "Care to join?" he asks. You nod, mostly because refusing seems unsafe. He clips the end with an elegant tool shaped like a miniature guillotine and lights it from a long taper held by a servant. The first puff fills the air with a cloud that smells of leather, smoke, and the faintest hint of rebellion. "Now," the colonel says, settling back, "we can finally speak freely." The irony is, of course, that freely means the same three topics: politics, empire, and hunting. You brace yourself. Around the table, voices deepen. Words like parliament, colonies, profit margins, and honor roll through the air like a well-worn hymn. You take another puff of cigar, trying not to cough. The smoke curls upward, mingling with candlelight, forming small halos of masculine sanctity. At the far end, a gentleman begins lamenting the decline of morals in literature. Another insists that electric lighting will ruin the charm of the evening. The colonel grunts. "Progress is well and good," he says, "so long as it doesn't make people uncomfortable." You suppress a smile, the Victorian motto, perfectly summarized. Historians still debate whether these conversations truly mattered or were just rituals of reassurance. To modern ears, they sound like endless loops of self-congratulation, men reminding each other that the world still belonged to them. Yet there's also something fragile about it, a sense of uncertainty beneath the bravado. You can almost hear the cracks in the empire through the clinking of crystal. Meanwhile, beyond the closed door, the women are enacting their own ritual. You imagine them gathered around the drawing-room hearth, cups of tea replacing wine, fans fluttering like punctuation. Their talk, though quieter, carries its own sharp edges. There's gossip, of course, scandals, and silks, but also strategy, marriage prospects, social alliances, the subtle warfare of introductions and invitations. A quirky tidbit. In some households, the ladies' drawing-room conversation was carefully timed so that the men could finish their cigars just as tea was served. The butler would then knock twice, a signal for reintegration. The goal was to make the whole evening feel spontaneous, even though it was choreographed down to the minute. The colonel leans closer, smoke curling from his lips. "The trick," he says, "is to know what not to say." Half of life is silence. He takes a sip of port, eyes distant. The other half is knowing who's listening. You nod, wondering how much truth hides behind that platitude. Someone mentions the Queen again, inevitably. Another guest praises her steadfast moral example. The colonel raises his glass solemnly. To Her Majesty. All echo the toast. You follow suit, the sweet heaviness of port coating your tongue. The ritual feels both reverent and empty. A moment of unity built on habit, more than heart. The smoke grows thicker, the air warmer. Laughter rolls now, looser, rougher. The men's restraint begins to crumble, not into scandal, but into comfort. You catch glimpses of something genuine in their tired smiles. The colonel tells a story about a disastrous fox hunt, and, for once, everyone truly laughs. Eventually, the butler appears at the door, bowing slightly. The signal. The ladies are ready. The men rise again, brushing stray ash from their cuffs, straightening posture, reattaching dignity. The door opens, and you're greeted by the scent of tea, flowers, and the delicate murmur of polite laughter. The transition feels almost like waking from a dream, one world folding neatly into another. The women glance up, smiles perfected once more. The hostess gestures gracefully toward a side table laden with cakes and teacups. "Gentlemen," she says, "you've been patient. Please, join us." You move among the gathering, teacup replacing wineglass, conversation softening like silk. The topics are harmless again: the weather, upcoming fetes, perhaps the new fashions from Paris, carefully sanitized of Parisian scandal. Yet you can sense an undercurrent of relief. Everyone's performing still, but the performance has lost its tension. Historians still argue whether the Victorian gender divide at dinner truly separated experience or merely disguised common fatigue. Beneath the roles, men and women alike were weary of pretending, bound by the same expectations of grace, patience, and control. The only real difference was in the flavor of their cages. The colonel joins the hostess by the fireplace, offering her his arm. "A splendid dinner," he declares. She smiles, her face radiant but unreadable. "We do our best," she says, "though I sometimes think the table has more rules than Parliament." Laughter follows, a final shared irony, perfectly timed. You take your tea, the warmth seeping into your hands, and glance around. The evening's end is approaching. The guests are smiling again, the servants waiting for their last cues. For a fleeting moment, you see everyone, hosts, guests, staff, as parts of a single exhausted organism bound by decorum and candlelight. And as you sip, you think, perhaps the greatest secret of Victorian dinner etiquette wasn't in the forks or the posture or the endless rules. It was in endurance, the quiet, shared understanding that everyone, at heart, just wanted to get to dessert, share a laugh, and go home. The night has reached its soft descent, the after-dinner maneuvers. You feel the room shift, like an orchestra slowing from allegro to andante. Candles burn lower, their wax pooling at the bases of crystal holders. The air smells of smoke and sugar, the ghost of champagne still lingering. You glance at the clock on the mantel, just past 10, and realize that in Victorian terms, the evening has only begun its long goodbye. The hostess rises again, and this time no one seems alarmed. Her smile is calm, her gestures practiced. "Shall we take a little refreshment in the drawing room?" she asks, though it isn't a question. Guests begin to stand, murmuring gratitude, smoothing sleeves and skirts. The great migration begins. The drawing room is a sanctuary of plush furniture and softer light. The pianist has moved on to something gentle, the melody winding through the air like perfume. You follow the flow of guests, carrying your small glass of port like a passport through shifting territories of civility. The men fan out instinctively, forming clusters near the fireplace, their voices low and rumbling. The women reclaim the settees, a sea of silk and lace. You hover between worlds, not quite belonging to either, watching the whole machine of etiquette downshift into something almost human. A mainstream historical fact, the after-dinner drawing room routine served a crucial social purpose. It allowed digestion, both literal and emotional. After the stiffness of dinner, guests were expected to display their conversational grace in a more relaxed setting. The goal was to end the night on harmony, ensuring that tomorrow's gossip remained favorable. It was etiquette's cool-down phase. The colonel appears beside you, still faintly scented with cigar smoke. "Survived, did you?" he says, half smiling. You nod. "Barely." "Good," he says. "Means you did it right." He raises his glass to you, takes one last sip, and wanders off toward a group discussing the latest engineering marvel, a bridge somewhere you've never heard of. You find a place near the piano where the lady who guided you through dinner now sits, her fingers idly tracing the edge of a teacup. "You endured admirably," she says. "I half expected you to flee during the fish course." You grin. "I considered it, but the door was guarded by too much silverware." She laughs, soft and genuine, the kind of sound that feels like relief. Historians still argue whether these moments, after the plates, after the posturing, were when Victorians finally dropped their masks. Letters from the era hint that many treasured these last hours most. The gentle conversations, the stolen jokes, the feeling that, for once, no one was grading your manners. A quirky tidbit. Some hosts secretly planned drawing room games to keep guests awake through the post-dinner lull. Charades, riddles, or even amateur theatricals were common. One fashionable lady once wrote that nothing revives digestion like guessing absurdities in velvet. Tonight, however, your hostess opts for music. The pianist begins a waltz. Couples exchange glances, nothing overt, just the faint acknowledgement of rhythm and shared breath. The room sways almost imperceptibly. No one dances. That would be too improper without formal invitation. But the suggestion of movement hangs in the air like perfume. You find yourself studying faces now. The hostess, smiling still but softer. The butler in the doorway, finally allowing himself the faintest exhale. The colonel, laughing too loudly at a pun. The lady beside you, eyes tired but kind. The rigid evening has worn them all down to something beautifully human. She leans closer. "Do you know the real trick of surviving these evenings?" You shake your head. "It isn't knowing the rules," she says. "It's pretending you were never afraid of breaking them." You think of the fork forest, the soup silence, the dreaded banana, and you laugh quietly. Then, "I've been terrified elegantly." "Perfect," she says. "That's the whole point." The servants circulate with trays of tiny sandwiches and coffee served in delicate cups. You take one sip. The bitterness feels grounding after so much sweetness. Conversation weaves around you, soft as smoke. It's all pleasant nonsense now. Upcoming charity galas, who will summer in Bath, the shocking cost of good gloves. You realize the tone has shifted from performance to lullaby. Historians still debate whether Victorians truly enjoyed these drawn-out evenings or simply endured them out of duty. One diary from 1883 records a woman writing, "We all longed to go home, but no one could say so first." Another, from a gentleman, reads, "I could not leave until the colonel's anecdote was finished. It still is not." You sympathize deeply with both. The colonel does, in fact, start another story, Something about a railway picnic gone wrong, but it's gentle now, harmless, wrapped in the warm haze of fatigue. Everyone listens just enough. You watch the candlelight waver and realize that the night has entered its twilight state. Too late to leave, too early to sleep. Here's another small oddity. It was considered rude for guests to check the time or make any motion suggesting departure before the hostess gave a cue. Some houses even removed clocks from the drawing room to prevent nervous glances. You glance at the mantel anyway, instinctively seeking escape, and catch the hostess smiling. She's caught you. She nods slightly, mercifully. The signal has been given. Conversation soften further. Teacups clink once, twice, then rest. A footman begins opening the double doors to the hall, letting in the cool whisper of the outside night. Guests rise in waves, stretching without appearing to stretch. The air fills with murmurs of gratitude. Such a delightful evening. Your table was perfection. We must do this again soon. Everyone knows they won't, but that's not the point. You join the current of departures moving toward the grand hallway once more. The butler waits, steady as ever, your coat ready. He helps you into it with professional silence. For the first time all evening, you meet his eyes. There's a flicker there, amusement, perhaps pity, or the quiet solidarity of survivors. The colonel claps you on the shoulder. A triumph, he says. No spills, no scandals, no peas on the carpet. You grin. I'll frame that on a certificate. He chuckles. You'll be invited again. The lady approaches to bid farewell. Next time, she says softly, I'll teach you how to escape early. Is there a rule for that? You ask. Dozens, she says, smiling. And we break everyone. The carriages are being summoned outside. Through the frosted glass, you see the lamps bobbing in the fog. Hear the crunch of wheels on gravel. The night air will taste of coal smoke and freedom. You imagine stepping into it, loosening your collar, finally exhaling after hours of exquisite restraint. Inside, the last notes from the piano fade into silence. The hostess stands in the doorway, radiant and exhausted. As each guest departs, she murmurs, So lovely to see you. And you realize that this too is performance. Grace under fatigue, hospitality as endurance. When your turn comes, she takes your hand lightly. I hope you enjoyed yourself, she says. You meet her eyes and say the only thing that feels true, immensely. Thank you for letting me survive. She laughs, a genuine, weary laugh. Then you did splendidly. You step out into the fog. Behind you, the door closes with a soft click, sealing in the golden hum of conversation. The scent of wax and wine. Ahead, the city glitters faintly, alive with the sound of distant carriages. You walk toward it, lighter now, a little drunk on etiquette and history, thinking that perhaps you've finally learned what the Victorians never admitted aloud, that civility, in the end, is just the art of pretending to be comfortable. The carriage door shuts behind you with a soft thump, and at last you can breathe. The night is damp and cold, the kind of London chill that seeps into your bones but feels strangely cleansing after the suffocating glow of chandeliers. Through the window, the townhouse retreats, its lighted windows receding like lanterns floating down a foggy river. You lean back against the seat, gloved hands folded in your lap, heart still humming with the quiet triumph of survival. Outside, the city whispers, hooves striking cobblestone, distant laughter, the soft hiss of gas lamps catching the mist. You feel the vibration of the wheels beneath you, steady and comforting. The rhythm matches your heartbeat, as if both are settling after hours of discipline. Inside the carriage, your reflection flickers faintly in the glass, a face caught between exhaustion and amusement. You survived the Victorian dinner table, that peculiar battlefield of silver and silence. The etiquette gauntlet is behind you now, though its ghost lingers in every muscle of your spine. You smile faintly, remembering your own stiffness, your panic over forks, the Colonel's endless anecdotes, the lady's conspiratorial whispers. It's strange, isn't it, how something so simple as dinner could hold an entire civilization's anxieties. One evening, and you've lived their world, their obsession with control, their fear of embarrassment, their hunger for belonging. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly loved these rituals or merely endured them out of habit, but you suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Rituals, after all, give shape to chaos, and maybe they believed that manners, no matter how absurd, kept the world from unraveling. Your carriage turns onto a quieter street where the fog thickens into velvet. You imagine for a moment all the other carriages out there tonight, ferrying other exhausted guests back to their own silent houses. Behind every curtained window, someone is sighing with relief, unpinning hair, loosening corsets, shaking off the ache of posture. The grand illusion of composure ends the moment the front door closes. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Many Victorian households kept small mirrors by the entrance so guests could check their appearance one last time before leaving. The goal wasn't vanity, it was reassurance. To step back into the night, one had to make sure no trace of fatigue or frustration lingered on the face. Because even after surviving the dinner, the performance wasn't truly over. You chuckle softly to yourself. The Colonel's booming laugh echoes in your head, his warning about peas, his solemn salute to civilization in liquid form. And the lady, her gentle teasing, her quiet rebellion in whispers. Perhaps, you think, every age invents its own rules of survival. Theirs happen to involve lace gloves and fish knives. Ours hides behind smartphones and polite emojis. Different forks, same dance. The carriage rattles to a stop. The driver opens the door, and cool air rushes in, smelling faintly of coal smoke and damp earth. You step out, boots crunching on gravel. The street lamp hums softly overhead, and for a moment, the whole city feels suspended in that golden hush between centuries. You stand there, watching your breath fog in the air, and feel an odd tenderness for the world you've just left behind. Its absurdities, its elegance, its desperate need to seem proper. It's all so human. You picture the table again, the way the candlelight trembled on silver, the synchronized movements, the laughter that only half meant itself. There was beauty in it too. Beauty in trying so hard to be graceful in a world that rarely allows grace. You start toward home, or perhaps toward sleep, boots echoing softly. The mist curls around your ankles like fabric. You imagine the servants in that grand townhouse now, clearing the final plates, snuffing candles, whispering about the guests. You imagine the hostess at her dressing table, removing her jewelry one clasp at a time, her reflection finally unguarded. And somewhere, the Colonel probably snores contentedly, dreaming of perfect posture and obedient cutlery. Historians will keep arguing, of course. They'll debate the meaning of manners, the politics of propriety, the moral geometry of how one holds a spoon. But you've seen the truth firsthand. Etiquette, in all its exhausting precision, wasn't about superiority at all. It was about safety, rules woven tightly enough to keep loneliness from leaking in. The fog thickens again, soft and merciful. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the cool night wrap around you. You think of the candlelight, the laughter, the endless forks gleaming like constellations. You think of every careful breath, every forbidden slouch, every silent prayer to get through the next course. And slowly, those images begin to fade, melting into one long drowsy sigh of relief. You're home now, or somewhere quieter, somewhere beyond the reach of tablecloths and polished silver. The night outside hums faintly, a steady lullaby of distance. You can almost hear it, the fading clink of glasses, the echo of laughter wrapped in velvet fog. Every detail of the evening dissolves like sugar in warm tea. Your shoulders loosen first. The stiffness drains away. The breath you've been holding since the soup course finally escapes, slow and soft. The rules, the posture, the careful choreography, all of it slips off your body like an old coat left by the door. You're weightless now, just a drifting thought among the gas lamps. Imagine the candles going out one by one, their smoke curling upward in gentle spirals. Imagine the servants closing the doors, the pianist resting her hands in her lap. The great house sleeps again, and the city exhales around it. Everything that mattered an hour ago, the forks, the gestures, the endless manners, feels very small now. What remains is the quiet, the mercy of quiet. You sink deeper into it. The hum of the carriage becomes the rhythm of your breathing. The soft rustle of silk turns into the whisper of a blanket. The candlelight fades to the dim glow behind your eyelids. And as the last image of that dinner fades, those perfect forks, those polite smiles, you realize you've reached the best kind of ending, the one where nothing needs to be said, nothing needs to be performed, and every rule has finally fallen silent. Good night, traveler. You've survived the etiquette of the Victorian dinner table. Rest easy. Your posture no longer matters.